letter in SEDS. We understand that that's a tight timeline. However, this is built in to assist you in meeting the 30-day requirement and to ensure that we're giving our parents enough time to respond. LEAs must complete the initial eligibility determination within 60 days after obtaining parent consent. So for the purposes of federal reporting, this is the metric that we use to report to the federal government on our initial evaluation timeliness. So when you are being issued findings later on this year, they will be around this specific component of completing the eligibility determination within 60 days of obtaining parent consent. And as I said earlier, this timeline applies to referrals received on or after July 1, 2018. Referrals received prior to or on June 30th, 2018 are under the 120-day timeline. However, we are past 120 days since June 30th, so we shouldn't have any old timeline referrals hanging out around there, but I did want to flag it for you in case you somehow do. So on the reasonable efforts front, as I said, reasonable efforts must begin within 10 business days of referral. And reasonable efforts, you guys know this rule, it's the 3-2-3 rule, right? Reasonable efforts consists of at least 3 documented attempts using 2 of the following modalities on at least 3 different dates. And the modalities include telephone calls, correspondence, and that can include emails and text messages, and then visits made to the parent's home or place of employment. And for each of these things, you also want to be, or each of these modalities, you want to be documenting any responses that you receive from the parent or any lack of response that you receive. So when you are trying to obtain parent consent, you want to make sure that you're clearly documenting these attempts and the purpose of the contact in the communications log. So say that you made a phone call to the parent for the purpose of obtaining parental consent for initial evaluation. Attempts that are clearly ineffective, such as calling a disconnected phone number or a phone number that you know is outdated, those are not considered reasonable efforts to contact the parent. And if a parent fails to respond to the request for parental consent, the LEA may issue a PWN notifying the parent that, that the LEA is not going to proceed with the initial evaluation process. So, and in that PWN, you want to advise the parent that they may submit another referral, and that will reinitiate the evaluation process. So this is because we know that the requirement is to make reasonable efforts within 30 days of referral, right? But what happens if the parent doesn't respond within those 30 days? And if the parent fails to respond, you may issue this PWN. However, keep in mind that when you issue the PWN, it's going to close the referral in SEDS, and that will delete any information or data that was entered in the analysis of existing data section. So you're going to lose all of that information that you have in there. So OSSI is encouraging LEAs to give the parents a little bit of grace in this and leave the referral open for an additional 30 days to allow for the parent to respond. And all of this information was covered in the guidance that we issued in August. There's a link at the bottom of this page, and it's on our website. It's the school year 1819 special education guidance. And there's a ton more information in that document around the changes around initial evaluation, the changes to secondary transition, the updates in SEDS, and then how our monitoring frameworks have been updated since then. So please continue to refer to that guidance for more information on the changes that have occurred since last school year. And now I'm going to turn it over to Annette to do a quick review of those survey results related to the initial evaluation timeline.
Great, thank you, Christy. And as always, feel free to type your questions into the question chat box at any time as we go along. So on November 6th, there was a letter that went out from Sharon Gaskins, who's the interim assistant superintendent for the K-12 Systems and Supports Division here at OSSI, and it was sent to all LEA special ed points of contact who were listed in eSchool Plus, as well as anyone who is listed as a point of contact for the Special Education Enhancement Fund Formula Grant, otherwise known as SEEF. So, and in this letter, the letter, of course, reminded you of the new initial evaluation timeline, but it also, what OSSI did was take all of your initial evaluation timeliness data from last school year and bumped it up against the new timeline to see how you would have performed if the new timeline had been in effect last year. So again, this is just a hypothetical exercise. The data that you received in this letter is not actually compliance data. Again, the percentages per timeliness that you saw in this letter is not actual compliance data, as it is last year's timeliness data with this year's timeline superimposed on it, so that you can reflect back and see how you would have performed if the new timeline was in effect last year, but it was not. So if you have not yet seen a copy of this letter, I urge you to get in touch with your official LEA Special Ed point of contact, if that is not you, and ask to see that letter. It was sent via Jonathan Elkin, who's a special assistant to Sharon Gaskins in the K-12 division. And that letter also invited you to participate in a survey regarding challenges you may be facing during the initial evaluation timeline. We're pleased to report that as of yesterday, 48 LEAs have responded to this survey. We have an abundance of information, and I'm going to share high-level results with you at this time so that you can see what other LEAs are struggling with and maybe how you are the same or different than other LEAs and how they are experiencing this new timeline. I also want to say that OSSE plans to take a very deep look and a lot of time digging into the results of this survey to inform how we can better support you and to be more aware of the challenges that are happening on the ground with this new shorter timeline. So we appreciate you taking the time to fill out this survey. If you are not among the 48 LEAs who have responded to this survey, we invite you to still go ahead and complete this survey. Even though your results will not be captured in the next few slides, there is still time for you to submit your responses so that OSSE leadership can review and see your experiences. So here we go. I'm just going to breeze through this pretty quickly because this is just the results of the survey. It's not any analysis or decisions that have been made by OSSE yet at this time, but we want to make you aware. The first part of this survey focused on your challenges with that first 30 days between the referral and when you hopefully are able to obtain parental consent. And you will see here that the responses across the 48 LEAs vary from LEA to LEA as to regards to whether or not the parental failure to return paperwork or be responsive is a challenge. And this is the high-level data. And then we also want to share just a few comments and quotes that can be helpful in seeing some of the common themes we saw. We had dozens and dozens of comments for each question, so we just tried to pull out some that are representative of several comments. People expressed frustration with parent phone numbers changing, or parents not using email, not responsive to scheduling requests, and we did have one LEA share a best practice that they have now made it a point during the enrollment period when interacting with parents for the first time to specifically talk about the need for parents to be responsive with paperwork throughout the school year. So thank you for sharing that best practice to that LEA. The next question talked about the high number of referrals coming in and whether or not that is a challenge for your LEA. You can see here that you're spread pretty evenly across the board in whether or not this is a challenge for your LEA. And these comments may be more insightful into some of those challenges. Again, we received dozens and dozens of comments. These are just a few excerpts that represent general themes. There was definitely a lot of themes around parents or general education teachers not knowing when it's appropriate to make referrals and sometimes making those referrals without considering other factors or other options for support or looking into pre-referral supports. There was also a lot of input around certain times of year when the referrals seem to pile up and it can be difficult to complete the timeline. For example, right before holidays and such. We also have this last comment here is an LEA that shared how they had to do a complete review and revision of their policies and procedures to make sure that they could handle this new timeline, and it led to the creation of spreadsheets to track actions, etc. So thank you for sharing thank you for being candid about some of the changes and best practices that your LEAs are now sharing. Then we looked into the issue with having a shorter time frame to gather existing student level data. Again, this is for the analyze existing data phase. This is not talking about conducting further assessments. This question was specifically focused on challenges in doing the analyze existing data during this initial time period. And for most of you, it's not a major challenge, but it's definitely a minor and moderate challenge for several of you. Additional comments reflect that it oftentimes this is an issue when the student is new to your LEA and you have a lack of data in general that can be very frustrating and make it hard to know whether or not you should actually seek parental consent. Hard to know whether or not you do suspect if the student has a disability. Also, many comments around behavioral data, the lack of behavioral data or discrepancies in behavioral data, and some challenges there. The last quote on this page is a best practice that an LEA shared about how they now have implemented school-wide data dives and data analysis to ensure they have a variety of academic and social emotional data for all their students so that if a referral does come up, they have something to rely on. I thought that was a great best practice that we wanted to share with you today. And then any other factors that may impact your LEA's ability to gain parental consent within 30 days of referral. We heard mention of language barriers for the parents, school breaks and holidays, parents needing more time to process and figure out what's going on before they make a decision. Also, a lack of clarity as to whether or not something is actually an official referral or not, and just overall time and capacity. Those are general themes that we could see from our initial look at this survey data that we wanted to share with you. Hopefully many of you are feeling like you are not alone in the challenges that you're facing right now with this timeline. The next part of the survey focused on the 60-day timeline that starts when you obtain parental consent and lasts until you finish the eligibility determination process. The majority of you said, over 30% of you said that a lack of qualified evaluators is actually not a challenge. However, a good chunk of you did express this is a minor, moderate, or major challenge. So again, it can vary from LEA to LEA, but there are LEAs in each category. Some specific comments, themes that we saw regarding lack of qualified evaluators or how contracted evaluators are not flexible in their scheduling. Also, a lack of qualified bilingual evaluators. Somebody suggests, and of course, several of you expressed that you have hired your own internal on-staff evaluators, which has helped. We know not every LEA is poised to do that, but those of you have shared that it does help, but there still are challenges. And just the logistics in general of scheduling are we're challenging under the 120-day timeline, let alone the 60-day timeline. So thank you for your candid responses here. With regards to student attendant issues and parental failure to produce a child for evaluation, the majority of you expressed that this is a minor challenge, with a few of you in other categories. Some themes that we saw was that student attendance is an issue for those 3- and 4-year-olds because it's not a mandatory school age. We also saw many comments about school closings, field trips, and holidays affecting the timeline, affecting your ability to finish within the timeline. And of course, the inflexibility of contracted clinicians or evaluators who work at several LEAs are not as flexible to work with a student's sporadic attendance. We did have one LEA share some best practices that they are doing. They shared how they often schedule testing even up until 8 p.m. in the evening. Now, that's not to say everyone has to do that. We just wanted to share that as an example of the way one LEA is being creative with this. And parental scheduling delays. Again, your answers are mixed, with most of you saying it's a minor or moderate challenge. Some common themes we saw here is with the paperwork, sometimes the literacy level or language needs of the parent prevent the parent from providing information. transportation issues or not having a steady work schedule, and just overall scheduling concerns are very real for you in this timeline. We also asked about SEDS to document the initial evaluation process. This response is interesting. This was the most polarized response. Instead of being spread across the board, most LEAs were either it's not a challenge at all or very, excuse me. This is interesting. Most of you said it's not a challenge, with a few of you reporting that it is a minor challenge. And then lots of you provided additional comments, which was great. Somebody commented that being able to see the timeline calculated correctly on the main page would be helpful, so that you don't have to stress about trying to calculate it yourself. And we have done some work here at OSSI to address that recently, and we'll talk about that later in the webinar to make sure that everyone is very clear on what the compliance symbols mean and how those are calculated. Someone mentioned an issue with having access to SEDS for staff members, and so we want to remind you that as the LEA special ed point of contact, you should have the ability to grant access or modify access for any of your staff members to SEDS. And if you are for some reason do not have the ability to control SEDS access for all of your staff at your LEA, please reach out to OSSI to figure out why you're not able to do that. And of course, we wanted to acknowledge that we hear you about the time that it takes to enter information into SEDS. And any other factors that may affect your ability. We heard about students refusing to participate, trying to provide the information 5 business days in advance can be difficult when the evaluators do not complete the information super fast. We also heard other information in general about contractors requiring 45 to 60 days to do observations, write the report, as well as holiday seasons and long breaks impacting it. So it's many common themes. And we do want to remind you that here at the state level, we don't have a set amount of time that a contracted evaluator has to do all of their work. That is at the LEA level that those decisions are made, but we know many of you do commonly have 45 or 60 days or have maybe shifted to a 30-day, and we do acknowledge that getting the contractors to complete these quickly is a challenge for many of you. And any additional supports that would be helpful. We received a lot of input here, and again, we're very thankful for all of the time you took to give us input, and rest assured OSSI will definitely be reviewing this in more depth and detail in the coming weeks. Christy addressed earlier today what you should do and what OSSI recommends if the parent is not responsive and you're reaching the end of that 30-day timeline, that we recommend you can still keep that timeline, still keep that open. We included a comment here about a red stop sign causing stress and leading you to believe you should shut down the process. And here at OSSI, we want to remind you that red stop signs, OSSI doesn't use the compliance symbols for our monitoring purposes. And again, we'll remind you of this later in the webinar, but I'll say that again. OSSI does not use the red stop sign to decide whether or not you're out of compliance. Those compliance symbols are for your benefit, to flag for you that something is not yet done for a student, to draw your attention to it. So I know it's hard mentally to do this, but the red stop sign should not equate non-compliance on your behalf or anything that may be your fault. Rather, the red stop sign should just be a flag that further action is needed, or a flag to make sure you've documented your efforts so that it is not a compliance issue. So, and Karen's going to talk more about that in our webinar today about what we look for. And of course, many people talked about money. It would be helpful to have more funds. So that's something that we've heard loud and clear at OSSI about the expense of and the money that has to go into evaluators. So now we're going to turn the time, a few more comments. Okay, and other additional support. The slide continues. There's so many good input. There's many, we couldn't put them all on the slides, but we wanted to acknowledge that some of you talked about an electronic signature process to ease the paperwork burden. The Woodcock-Johnson, additional funding for more evaluators, an easier way to share data for new students transferring to a new LEA, more clarification about the summer timeline, and also perhaps a recommendation to shorten the service provider timeline to 30 days. And again, that's an LEA level decision, but it was good to hear from so many of you regarding this challenge. Great. So that was very fast and a high level, but we wanted to share with you the results so that you can see what's going on in the minds and in the buildings of other LEAs who are facing similar challenges in many cases. I'm now going to turn the time over to the IDEA Monitoring and Compliance Team Director, Karen Morgan Donaldson, who is going to talk about what her team looks for. And it's not the red stop sign. I'll give you a little teaser. Spoiler alert, it's not the red stop sign that her team looks for, but the things that they do look for when monitoring for timeliness compliance. So we're going to turn the time over to Karen. Let's do a quick sound check. Karen, can you are you on the line?
I am on the line. Can you hear me? Hello?
Okay, Karen, are you there?
Annette, yes, can you hear me? Annette?
Karen?
Okay, I am getting notice here that everybody can hear me.
Let's do a quick sound check. Oh, both of you. Okay, so people can hear Karen but not hear us.
Okay.
Here, either way.
Oh, okay, Karen, I think the sound went out for just a minute. If you could just go back and repeat just the last minute of what you were saying.
Okay, good morning. Can everybody hear me?
It's hard to do.
Good morning. Annette, can you hear me?
Great, we're good to go.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, everybody, and good morning. I'm going to be going over initial evaluation and reevaluation monitoring. I'm going to give you a little bit of background as to what we monitor for and how we report to the Office of Special Education. And then I will also go through how we actually monitor and give you some insight into our manual review that we do. So as the state education agency, OSSE is responsible for reporting to OSEP on timeliness of both initial evaluation and reevaluation for the District of Columbia. For initial evaluation, we report to OSEP once a year through the annual performance report, which we actually submit in February of each year. And this is initial evaluation is also referred to as Indicator 11. We also monitor for reevaluation, and as a state, we are required to report to OSEP several times a year and report via specific conditions report. You might be more familiar with special conditions report, but just so you know, that has changed to specific conditions report. So just to give you an idea of why we monitor and how we report. So when we report timeliness data to OSEP, we are required to classify the reason for delay for initial evaluation and reevaluation. And there are two buckets or two categories that we use, LEA delay and parental delay. When an initial or a reevaluation is untimely, the District of Columbia as a state is penalized if it is due to LEA delay. So in order to address this, LEAs are encouraged to do two things. There are two things that we have noticed that are kind of easier fixes when we're looking at noncompliance and making sure that these individual cases don't fall under LEA delay. So there are two things that I'm going to be covering, and that is accurately and thoroughly documenting when a parental delay does occur. We're going to go over exactly what that should look like in the communications log. And we will also talk about completing due diligence to exit students from SEDS. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so documenting parental delay, and I just want to clarify here, when we're talking about parental delay for initial and reevaluation monitoring, for the purposes of my team, we monitor from consent to the eligibility, and that's for initial. We are not talking about referral to consent when we're talking about initial. Parental delay is determined when a parent is continually unresponsive to an LEA attempts to make contact during the initial or reevaluation process. Parental delay may concern the failure to provide consent. I have that in there, but again, for the purposes of the manual review that we're talking about today, we're not talking about consent, we're talking about consent to eligibility. But parental delay may also concern parents repeatedly missing meetings, rescheduling of meetings, not making students available for evaluations. So in order to determine parental delay, the following conditions must be met. So these are the things that we look for when we're doing our manual review to determine whether parental delay is the cause for untimeliness. So these look familiar. These are the same criteria that we use for reasonable efforts when we're making trying to get consent from parents. So again, LEAs must have attempted to make contact with the parent at least 3 times, 3 different dates, using 2 or more modalities. And then all attempts must have been made a minimum of 5 days prior to the end of the eligibility determination timeline. So again, this is 5 days prior to the date that either the initial evaluation is due or the reevaluation eligibility is due. The communication attempt should explicitly state that contact with the parent was made concerning an upcoming evaluation. So when we're doing our review, we are looking for very explicit language discussing, talking about the evaluation and the eligibility process. So specifically, we're looking for the following scenarios. The LEA is unable to reach the parent at all. The parent has missed scheduled meetings, and the parent failed to schedule a meeting. And then the parent asked for a delay in the process. Okay, next slide. I'll be looking at some specific examples and non-examples. I'm not going to read through all of these, but the examples of acceptable language, these are things that the monitoring team, when we're doing our manual review, this is showing us this language is explicit and shows us exactly what was attempted and what the attempt was related to. For the unacceptable language, text to the parent because I had not heard from them, called to remind the parent about the upcoming evaluation meeting. You know, a reminder is not sufficient. We are looking for scheduling the meeting and giving very explicit, we are trying to schedule the meeting for this date. I tried to reach the parent using this phone number. I mailed a letter using this address. So very, very explicit, detailed information. So the more detailed, the better. Next slide. Okay, so we just went over parental delay. So what we're trying to, convey to LEAs is if there truly is a parental delay, we need to be able to prove it. So being very explicit in our communication log is one way that we can take the onus off of the LEA and put it in with the parent. So another thing that we have noticed, and this pertains specifically to reevaluation monitoring, what we've noticed is that students are sometimes, unenrolled students remain on the LEA SEDS roster, and I know that this is nothing new to a lot of LEAs, and I know that this is a challenge, but we are here to support you and give you additional information and also just reiterate information that we've already given you related to how can we solve this. So in the instance, if a student is sitting on a LEA's SEDS roster, even if they haven't attended the LEA for 2 years, that still counts as LEA delay, and as a district, we are still penalized for that particular student and that particular case. So what we want to do is avoid that. To give you some information about how this relates to and how this affects LEAs, if this student that is sitting on your caseload, on your SEDS roster for 2 years is not attending, your LEA will be issued an initial finding of noncompliance. And those of you that are familiar with the monitoring process, we issue initial reports or initial findings, and then we have a 10-day correction window where LEAs are allowed to provide various forms of evidence to prove that it was either timely or the student is no longer enrolled. So LEAs will get an initial finding, but they have the 10-day window to demonstrate that the student is no longer attending and is no longer enrolled. So by proactively exiting students from SEDS, LEAs can avoid this step altogether, because if the student isn't on the roster, then LEAs won't receive an initial finding through DC CATS. So I want to go over quickly just a very high level the steps for how to exit a student from SEDS. So what's important is that you have access, and there's a link here to the OSSI entry and exit guidance. It's important that you choose the correct withdrawal code for the student. So why they are no longer with your LEA, and then complete due diligence action items required for that withdrawal code. And we will go over some examples of that later. And then when in doubt, you always want to issue a prior written notice in SEDS. So once all 3 of those steps are complete, you want to go ahead and put in an OSSI service ticket to notify us that the student needs to be removed from the roster. So sometimes we get requests to remove students from rosters, but they haven't completed the necessary steps and submitted the appropriate documentation or completed the PWN in SEDS. So that's just a reminder there. And if we could move to the next slide. These are some issues, and we've presented this slide before, but this is just a reminder. Removing students from SEDS, these are some issues that are common that LEAs have, and these are some of the steps and resolutions that you can take. And again, the OSSI entry and exit guidance can give you all the information and all the withdrawal codes that you may need, and also give you the appropriate documentation that you need to submit for each withdrawal code. But I do want to repeat that when in doubt, if you complete a PWN for including the information for while the student withdrew, that would be very helpful. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to type in the question box right now, or you can always reach out to me separately at karen.morgan-donaldson@dc.gov.
Great, thanks, Karen. All right, I'm going to do a quick review of the changes to the initial evaluation compliance symbols in SEDS. And as a reminder, the compliance symbols within SEDS serve as a visual reminder to assist users in timely completion of your responsibilities. OSSI does not rely on SEDS compliance symbols when we determine findings of noncompliance. We look at the back end data to see timeliness indicators and dates and all that kind of fun stuff. So we pull the back end data. The symbols that you see, your favorite red stop sign symbol, that is to serve as a visual reminder. So your compliance and your findings are not dependent upon the compliance symbols as they display in SEDS. So in consideration of the new initial evaluation timeline this year, OSSI put in a few new compliance symbols to help you navigate the process. So in relation to parent consent, again, you have 10 days from referral to begin your reasonable efforts and 30 days total to obtain parent consent. So we have a new P with a stop sign and P with a yield sign to show compliance with the 30-day requirement. So the law says that LEAs are only required to make reasonable efforts within 30 days. The requirement is not to actually obtain the consent within 30 days. But to best support LEAs in meeting the 10 days expectation and also in meeting the overall 30 days, the expectation is really that reasonable efforts be made in such a manner and such a time frame that really supports you and allows you to obtain that parent consent within 30 days. The best way to configure the system was for SEDS to establish a due date for parent consent that is 30 days after the referral date. So you will see these compliance indicators based on 30 days from the date of referral. And remember that the date of parent consent is the date that the LEA receives the actual signed consent back. So when you receive that consent from the parent, we want to see you either signing and dating it or doing a date stamp on it and uploading that into SEDS. And then you you manually enter the date of parent consent in SEDS. And the date that you receive the consent back from the parent is the date of parent consent. We know that documents can get backpacked. Sometimes the parent has it for however long, but the date that you receive it back from the parent is the date of parent consent. So SEDS has also been configured to require an eligibility determination within 60 calendar days of the date of parent consent. And also, a reminder around parent consent is that even if you complete your reasonable efforts, your 3 contacts, 2 modalities, 3 different dates within 30 days, LEAs have an ongoing obligation to continue to make efforts past the 30 days if it's appropriate. So if you've had a bunch of back and forth with mom about trying to get parent consent, you don't just hit those 30 days and say, oh, well, we're done. We've done our reasonable efforts. We want to see you continuing to reach out to that parent if it makes sense in that situation. So sorry about that. As I said, SEDS has been configured to require an eligibility determination within 60 calendar days of parental consent. And you will see the red E or the yield sign with an E to indicate compliance with the eligibility timeline. And there's also more information on this in that special education guidance that I referenced earlier, and that's linked at the bottom of these slides. I'm going to turn it back over to Annette.
Great. Thank you, Christy. Those are good reminders that the OSSI does not use the compliance symbol to make actual findings of non-compliance. Those compliance symbols are purely for your benefit. So don't let the red stop sign stress you out. Just know that just document your reasonable efforts in the using the tips Karen has given you, and then you can sleep at night. And the red stop sign doesn't have to be so scary. I shouldn't make jokes about the red stop signs. I know, it's real. Okay, moving on. Whoa, that was a crazy transition. Here we go. The LEA Planning Performance Report is a report that you, as the LEA Special Education Point of Contact, should have access to. Well, I'll show you how to test whether or not you have access to this. And is a report created specifically for you to help you monitor your own timeliness and with regards to initial evaluation, reevaluation, and IEP timelines. So the big major timeliness buckets. Now, this report has been around since 2011, maybe 2010. However, it's hiding in a tool that we do not very regularly use because so many of our other reports have shifted over to ClickSense. So this report actually pulls data from SEDS and pulls it together in a report that is very user-friendly for you, but you just have to know where to find it. So we're going to remind you today of where to find this report. Just talk for a minute about how to interpret the report, and hopefully you will be able to use it as a regular tool for your own benefit. Again, this is a tool for you. OSSE does not use the information in this report for compliance monitoring purposes nor for making findings. We simply make this available to you as a tool because it's helpful to have all of your timeliness data in one place, including a link to all of the students associated with that. So let's dig in. First of all, where do you find this secret report? Well, this report is located in something called Enterprise Reports. Looks like SLED. It looks like SLED, and you can get to it via SLED, but it's not actually in SLED. It's a separate report. Or you can go directly to this URL here on the screen. So if you're listening today, I encourage you to go to reports.osse.dc.gov or log into SLED. As a special ed point of contact, you should definitely have access to SLED. And if you don't, let's talk about how you get access to that. Okay. So this is where it's located. So the Enterprise Reporting System is a bunch of reports that pulls information from SEDS, compiles it in a user-friendly way. There's a variety of reports, some of which we have moved away from focusing on here because now we have better things in Click. But the LEA Planning and Performance Report, also called the LEA P P, is still here in Enterprise Reports for the current time. There may be a future time when we migrate it to a different tool, but for now it's here. It's here. If you log in, if you want to access through SLED to get here, what you do is click on Reports and select Enterprise Reporting System. That's one way you can test to see if you have access. And it should be the same login that you use for SLED that you use for Enterprise Reporting System. Or as a shortcut, you can go directly to reports.osse.dc.gov and attempt to log in that way. I want each of you to try to log in today and see if you have access. And if you do not, then first make sure you have SLED access. So try logging into SLED, make sure your access there is current, those credentials. And if you confirm that you have access to SLED, but not to Enterprise Reports, then you can use the OSSE support tool to shoot OSSE a quick ticket to request access to Enterprise Reports. Many of you very likely already have access to this and just did not know, or maybe have not recently visited this. Now, once you log into Enterprise Reports, if you look under the SEDS category of reports, you will see listed there LEA Performance and Planning Report. Here is what the report looks like currently. It is updated every night. It gets information from SEDS. It talks to SEDS every night in the middle of the night when we're sleeping, hopefully. And it shows real-time status of all your timeliness metrics. Now, so this changes every day, depending on, like, you might have, and the cool thing about this report is you can click, see how these blue categories are hyperlinked? If you click on that hyperlink, it actually pulls up a full list of all the students in that category. So you can drill down and see all the details and see which students are in the bucket of being held late or not being held. So this data changes each day and it piles up over time. Let's say, and I do want to remind you also that the logic rules behind this report, it's all about the student. Now, many of you have shared scenarios where a student is at a previous LEA and that previous LEA does not complete an initial eval or a reevaluation or an IEP on time. Then when that student transfers to your LEA, you inherit that overdue timeline. Yes, we know that is true. And yes, there's a red stop sign, but again, the red stop sign doesn't necessarily mean that you are at fault. It just means something has not been done. So the timeline follows the student. So yes, it is true that on your report you may have students showing up in the held late or the not held, not due to any fault of your own, but simply because you inherited a student whose timeline was overdue or almost overdue. But once again, we do not use this report for compliance or findings. This report is for you to know how to act. So keep that in mind when you're reviewing this report. So the current view. Currently, this report only calculates information based on the 120-day timeline. And I know what you're thinking. How is the 120-day timeline still relevant? That's over and done. Well, it's over and done. However, there are still, as recent as June 30th, 2018, you could have had a referral that will be measured under the 120-day timeline. So we will still continue to show this box on your report so that you can reflect on past performance data under the old timeline and catch any students who may have gone overdue under the 120-day timeline. And this report shows both initial eligibility and reevaluation. Also, so this is the performance part of the report. So it's called the performance and planning report because you reflect back on past performance and then you also look forward to what's coming down the pipe. So here is the planning portion of the report. It shows you the number of students coming up in the future and when their deadlines will happen. If you click on the link, it will take you to a list of specific students in each category. So that's the current view. OSSE is in the midst of updating this report so that it will also show data for the new timeline. It is not quite ready to launch, but the data team is working on it currently, and it should launch within the next week or so. And we will be sure to send you an email when it's officially launched so that you can start using this to monitor your performance under the new timelines. But here's a sneak peek as to the different boxes you will see on the report that can help you reflect on your initial eligibility. And again, the hyperlink in the category will link you to a list of specific students so that you can see you can plan ahead and take action as needed. Also, in determining how the logic and calculations will work for this new report, we became aware of an additional bucket that did not exist before. We now have a situation where in some rare cases, an initial evaluation is completed before the parental consent was documented. So we will have a separate place on the report for these anomalies so that you can also track those and be aware of those, and so that they won't get confused in with any of those other more straightforward timelines. So again, this report is coming very soon. We encourage you to test to see if you have access to this report as it currently stands and get access to that so that when this new report is fully launched, you are able to start utilizing this report immediately. And that is the LEA P. Oh, here's the view. And the view for the planning portion is actually not going to change that much. We're still going to show you which students are about to run out of their timeline. This part of the report will focus on that 60-day timeline that starts from upon receipt of consent and goes up through eligibility determination. So this last column here will no longer be relevant. Instead, we'll just show you what's coming up 30, 60 days and what is already overdue. So again, that is the planning and performance report. We're now going to have, we realize we're over time, but we started late. We just have 2 minutes left. We're going to have some brief updates and reminders on child count from our data team. And then we will talk very quickly about the SEDS survey that is ongoing. So we'll turn the time over to Pauline from DAR.
Thank you so much, Annette. I just wanted to give a quick reminder for the child count second certification that's coming up on November 19th. Please make sure that all changes or resolution to your child count errors are resolved by Friday, November 16th. The second certification window will open on November 19th from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So please check your UDEs to make sure that you're resolving all your child count errors to ensure that all your students are counted for on the certification date.
So, Aussie wants to hear from you about all the things you love about SEDS. We put out in the LEA Look Forward last week a user survey seeking input about your experiences, challenges, and desired improvements. We already have 36 responses. This is a very quick survey. It'll take you fewer than 5 minutes. So please take the time to complete that survey by Friday, November 16th. The results that we get around this survey will help us to align future systems development with your needs. So this is one of what we intend to be many opportunities for you to provide us input on SEDS, but we want to hear from you about your pain points, your experiences, and things that you would like to see improved in the system. So please complete this survey. And this survey isn't necessarily just for LEA special education POCs. You can ask your SPED teachers, gen ed teachers, related service providers, heads of school. We want to hear from everybody. But the survey is going to close on Friday, November 16th. So please give us your feedback before Friday. There's a link at the bottom of this slide, and it was also in last week's LEA Look Forward and will appear again in this week's LEA Look Forward, which should go out today.
Oh, and when we send out the slides, we'll send out this link. And we'll put the link in the chat box right now, too.
Sure.
Awesome. Great. And the other reminder is that we have a fabulous series going on currently around IEP capacity building presented by our in-house special education staff member, Jennifer Carpenter. So here's what's upcoming for that. You may have staff that you would like to send to this training series. It's a very outstanding training series. It's gotten rave reviews and found to be very helpful by many participants thus far. And we want to thank you for joining us today. We'll stay on the line to try to chat with you about a few additional questions as we are able. Next month, the webinar, once again, will be held on the second Wednesday of the month, not the third Wednesday, because we realized by the time the third Wednesday rolls around, y'all may be not at school, but celebrating the holidays. So tune in, mark your calendars for December 12th, and during that webinar, we definitely hope to share additional updates with you around all of the feedback you've given around the initial evaluation timeline, as well as feature the LEA Planning Performance Report live, as it will be launched by then. In the meantime, should you have any questions, reach out to the contact person listed on your screen. Thank you, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday.
We'll leave the questions open for a minute or two just in case you have any more questions.